ladies and gentlemen. We do this each and every year. Always thrilled to have him on. He is the creator of Football Outsiders. We like to have him on every quarter of the season, but we certainly have done this one right before the postseason. I would say maybe 10 years in a row with the podcast before this, making his annual appearance, kind enough to take a few moments away from responding to irrational people on Twitter, enraged by his highly offensive analytics-based tweets. It's Aaron Schatz, everybody. How you doing, Aaron?
Hey, I'm good. There have been fewer irrational people on Twitter lately responding. I mean, not in general. There's plenty of irrational people on Twitter in general, but responding to me, there have been fewer than recently. Recently, there have been fewer than usual.
Do you think that's because you have just found your audience? Do you think, what do you make of that? Anything?
I think it's really interesting. I think that everybody understands the Vikings this year, including Vikings fans. Like Vikings fans, most of them kind of know that they're playing with house money. Like the Vikings require less constant explanation than they would have 10 years ago.
Well, let's start there. That's a great point. Are they? You came on here for the quarter poll one at the 3-quarter mark, and you said, I don't want to call them a fraud, but I do want to, and I've quoted you on this many times since, I call them historically interesting.
Yeah.
Are they historically interesting to the point that they are the most anomalous of all teams in the history of Football Outsiders?
I think pretty close, yes. This is crazy. I mean, I will admit our DVOA ratings have the Vikings lower than most advanced play-by-play ratings, so I don't know quite why we have them so low. Like, I would expect them to be around 21st or 22nd. Instead, we have them 27th at 13-4. So they're by far the worst team in our ratings ever to be even close to that. They are the 9th worst team in our ratings to ever make the playoffs since 1981. It's wild. I mean, the fact, one of the very easy, you don't need to break down play-by-play to project how teams should do based on just points scored and allowed. It's called the Pythagorean Projection, right? It was invented by Bill James for baseball. We carried it over to football. Based on that, remember, the Vikings were outscored this year by 3 points.
Yes.
The Vikings are the biggest outperformer in NFL history. Like, I went back to 1950. Like, before 1950, it's a different sport, honestly. But if you go back to 1950, like, they're the first team to ever outperform their Pythagorean projection by 4 wins or more. It's insane.
Yeah, because, I mean, they should be 8-1, right? Like, based on Pythag. Instead, they're 13-4.
Yeah.
Kelley, I just want to repeat what Aaron said, because Kelley's Team Vikings over here has been known to don a Viking hat on the show. Should be pointed out, Aaron. The 9th worst team since 1981 per DVOA, per Football Outsiders, to make the postseason.
It's wild. It's wild. I mean, like Aaron said, though, I think everybody if you're a Vikings fan or if you're betting on the Vikings, yeah, you know who they are at this point. Like, it is, it's fraudulent. Am I betting them this week again? Yeah, I am, because it's the fraudulent bull. I think the Giants are pretty much just as bad.
Oh, yeah, the Vikings, first of all, Vegas knows this. Like, the lines... again, I don't know if 10 years ago it would have been different. But now Vegas knows, smart gamblers know, everybody knows. The lines reflect this. And yes, the Giants also outperformed their DVOA. We have their DVOA as higher, and I like Giants +3 for this weekend. But this is the fraud bowl.
Yes.
So, like, the Vikings this is the best possible first round that the Vikings could have gotten. It's a good chance they're going to win this. And then go to San Francisco and get completely slaughtered.
Okay. I have a comment and then I have a question. So the comment is DVOA, for those who don't know what we're talking about. DVOA, it's a proprietary stat that measures the success of any given play compared to the league average level of success for that play, given the situation at the time and all the factors inherent within that. Is proprietary stat, defense value over adjusted at Football Outsiders. So when we refer to DVOA, that's what we're talking about. But we brought up the Vikings. We just talked about the Vikings and the Giants, which then begs the question. Is this the worst? Because I was saying yesterday, I was like, look, I'm going to miss all of this in February. That's the one thing I want to state in advance. When football's over, I'm going to miss all of this terribly. But I said yesterday, I go, look, this is the worst bunch of teams, and I don't think I'm being prisoner of the moment. that I've ever seen in a postseason. The wild card week alone can't absorb them. 3 will get through the division round. So I ask you through DVOA, is it the worst collective bunch of teams to ever make the postseason?
Well, part of that is there's 2 extra teams, right? I mean, 2004 was pretty bad because the whole NFC, other than Philadelphia, was bad in 2004. Like, you had a playoff game between Seattle and St. Louis where I think both of those teams were in the bottom 5 of our ratings for 2004. Like, 2004 was pretty bad. But this year has been marked by a very low standard deviation of teams. The teams are very closely grouped around average, right? We have 14 teams above average and 18 below. Everything is kind of set off by the fact that we have this group of 7 teams that is far ahead of the rest of the league. For most people, it's 6 teams, right? Cincinnati, Kansas City, Buffalo, Philadelphia, Dallas, San Francisco. Our ratings include Baltimore, but we have those teams much better than the rest of the league. So it's just a weird year overall.
Your ratings include Baltimore. What do you do with a team like Baltimore headed in the postseason where you have no idea who's playing quarterback?
I think for our picks against the spread on Football Outsiders, I gave them a 50% chance of Lamar Jackson playing. But obviously, they're a very different team without Lamar Jackson playing, and we should know more in a day or two about whether Lamar Jackson is going to play. Like, they're going to do everything possible to help him, but the initial sound does not sound good, like he's going to play.
What is your when we get to let's get to that. Let's get to this week's picks, and I have a whole bunch more to ask you about your preseason projections and more than that. But when it comes to this week's plays, what are your favorite ones then?
I mean, my favorite is Giants +3 because of the fact that we have. I mean, I realize we're a sort of an exception out there. We have the Giants higher than the Vikings in our ratings, and I like the +3. The Vikings have played so many close games this year. God, I would love Giants +4 even more, but the Vikings have played so many close games this year that I feel like even if the Vikings win, you're just going to push this bet. Like, what are the odds that this game on either side is more than, 3 points? It's every Vikings game is 1 possession. The other one that I really like is I think that the Miami quarterback situation is a mess, and I know it's kind of extreme, but I like Buffalo -11.
If it's Skylar Thompson, I sure do too. I really do.
Buffalo is our number 1 team. I mean,
All right. By the way, again, I'm tripping off the Minnesota thing. 27th. You may have answered this already. I might have missed it. Is there a team that was ranked lower in just a season's rankings that made the postseason lower than 27th?
No, 27th is the lowest for any of the postseason teams. We have the Giants were 21st.
No, I'm saying in previous years, was there ever a team that was ranked lower than 27th?
Oh, yeah, the Rams. I believe the 2004 Rams were 32nd.
I'm told that's not good. 32nd. I'm told that's not good.
Yeah, that year was crazy. I mean, it really was like the NFC had 1 good team in 2004.
Okay, so go on with what you were saying. So Vikings 27th, Giants 21st. I'm curious what the others are.
These are the playoff teams that are below average. Tampa Bay 17th and the Chargers 18th.
Ooh.
The Chargers are surprisingly mediocre in our numbers for this year, but an asterisk, right? Like, no Joey Bosa for most of that time, no Keenan Allen for a lot of that time, no Mike Williams for a lot of that time. The Chargers are probably a better team than our ratings suggest, but we have the Jaguars above them, and I kind of like the Jaguars are sneaky, man. I kind of like the Jaguars as the pick in this game.
Is there a head coach, Aaron, speaking of the Chargers, because it obviously triggers Brandon Staley in one's mind, is there a head coach that you sort of pump your fist about as being the analytics guy, the guy who just adheres to analytic-based decision-making better than anyone else? I know Brandon Staley was billed as that guy.
He used to be that guy.
Yeah.
Brandon Staley used to be that guy, and he went away from it this year. And I don't think there is a single coach. There are a few who I feel are very analytically sound compared to everybody else, like Nick Sirianni, Doug Peterson, Dan Campbell in Detroit, but no one coach that stands out.
Okay. So many things to ask you. Let me just ask you this real quick. We already talked about the Vikings are the worst team to make the postseason, ranked 27th. Who's the best ranked team that failed to make the postseason?
That would be the Detroit Lions.
Where do you have them?
They finished 9th in total DVOA and 6th in the weighted ratings that give less weight to the early season.
Any better predictor of postseason performance? I know it doesn't apply to the Lions. Weighted versus standard DVOA?
Weighted is a slightly better predictor, but there's actually not that much difference.
Okay. Whole bunch more to ask Aaron, including what his projections were from before the season and how they ended up manifesting or not manifesting, that and so much more. And who's the greatest team of all time since 1981? Always a fun question and answer. Numbers Game, VSiN, the Sports Betting Network, coming back. When you talk about a team like the Lions and how you have them 9th and then weighted even higher, weighted DVOA, meaning more weight to the last part of the season. Yeah. Does that, in your history of Football Outsiders and projections, does that typically translate beautifully to the next season?
No. You would think it would, but it doesn't. The weighted numbers where you're better at the end of the season do not roll over to the next year the way you would expect. And that's especially true for players. There are a lot of quarterbacks will be better in the second half of the year, and you'll be like, well, he's a young quarterback, and he finally got it. And then the following year, they go back down. Like, it's really interesting the way first half, second half splits do not roll over to the next year.
And is that just, in your opinion, just the nature of football, that nothing is static and coaches change, or what do you make of that?
I don't know, because some of it you would think personnel changes, if the reason for a team to be better in the second half is the personnel change, and then that personnel change carries over to the next year, you would think that the quality would carry over to the next year, but it doesn't. I think some of it is just, 7 or 8 games is just too much of a small sample size to go by, and you're just better off going by the whole season, 17-game sample size, than you are just looking at like the second half of the year.
Go to VSiN.com/subscribe to become a VSiN Pro subscriber today.